The Haunted Legacy of the Villisca Murder House. If you think the dark can't reach you, think again. Like, subscribe, and stay with us before the next story finds you first. The Villisca house sits quietly on a corner of a small Iowa town, its white wooden frame looking harmless under the sun. But at night, the silence becomes heavy. So heavy that visitors say it feels like the walls are holding their breath. And on one cold October evening, a tourist staying overnight called 911 in a panic. The line captured only his shaking voice, the creak of footsteps behind him, and then the call went dead. When officers arrived minutes later, they found him standing outside, trembling, unable to explain what he'd heard inside the empty rooms. He kept repeating one sentence. Someone was walking upstairs, but no one else was there. That moment reopened a question that has haunted Villisca for over a century. What really happened inside that house in 1912? And why does the fear never leave? To understand the panic in that man's voice, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the summer of 1912, when the Moore family lived what seemed like a simple, peaceful life. Josiah and Sarah Moore were well known in town, the kind of family everyone waved to on the street. Their children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, were described as cheerful, always running around with school friends, always leaving the screen door rattling behind them. On June 9th of that year, they hosted two young sisters who had attended church with them. The girls were excited for a sleepover, unaware that the quiet home would soon become the center of one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in American history. The next morning, neighbors noticed the house was strangely still. No one came out. No sound. No movement. Just the soft morning light resting on the windows. When a relative entered the home to check on them, they made a discovery that shook the entire nation. 8 lives had been taken in the night. No witnesses, no clear motive, and no one has ever been held responsible. But the shock didn't end with the tragedy. Because as investigators searched the rooms, they found disturbing clues suggesting that whoever had entered that home had stayed far longer than anyone expected. And what they found next changed everything. The discovery inside the Villisca house left investigators shaken, and if you're still here, brace yourself. The deeper we go, the colder it gets. When authorities stepped into the house that June morning, the air felt unnaturally still. As they moved from room to room, they found objects positioned in ways that didn't make sense. Mirrors covered, lamps moved, and a plate of food left untouched on the table. One investigator later said it looked as if someone had been trying not to see their own reflection. Another said it felt like whoever had been inside had taken their time, walking the house in complete silence. The most unsettling detail came from the kitchen. A bowl of water sat beside the sink, clouded and murky. It appeared someone had washed their hands there before leaving. To detectives, it was a sign that the person responsible didn't panic. They didn't rush. They moved calmly, methodically, as if they had planned the entire night down to the last minute. That single clue haunted the sheriff for decades. Rumors spread through Villisca almost instantly. People whispered about strangers seen in town days before. Store owners recalled a quiet man lingering too long near the hardware section. A few residents mentioned an unfamiliar figure walking along the railroad tracks at dusk. Every detail felt important, but none of it connected neatly. Dozens of suspects were questioned. Drifters, former employees, even prominent figures. But each lead eventually collapsed, leaving the case tangled and heavy. As the town struggled to return to normal life, the Moore home had already begun gaining a reputation. People claimed they would cross the street rather than walk past it. Children said they felt watched when they rode their bikes near the property. And neighbors insisted the house never sounded truly empty, even after it was boarded up. Years later, when the house was finally restored and opened to the public, investigators began documenting strange experiences. Lights flickering without explanation, sudden temperature drops, and muffled sounds echoing through the upstairs hallway. All small things, all easy to dismiss. But one night, a group of researchers conducting an overnight stay heard something that none of them could rationalize. Something that brought the quiet case roaring back into public attention. It began with a single sound from the attic, followed by something much harder to explain. The research team that stayed in the Villisca house that night was made up of 6 people, 3 historians, 2 investigators, and a sound technician. Their goal was simple: document the house after dark and compare the ambience to witness statements. For most of the evening, the house behaved like an old building, creaking boards, shifting wood, and the occasional wind tapping the siding. Nothing unusual. Around 2:15 a.m., they began setting up microphones in the attic. This was believed to be the place where the intruder had hidden before the 1912 tragedy. As the team reviewed earlier audio recordings, the technician paused, frowning. He replayed a section that captured a soft tapping sound, steady, rhythmic, like footsteps pacing in a tight circle. The group assumed it was one of their own team members, until they checked the video feed. At that exact moment, the attic was empty. Minutes later, the pacing sound resumed, louder this time. The investigators climbed the stairs, calling out to confirm the noise source. The moment they reached the top step, the tapping stopped completely, cut off in an instant. One of the historians described the silence that followed as too perfect, like someone holding their breath on the other side of a wall. They left the attic unsettled but determined to continue. Downstairs, they began discussing earlier clues from the 1912 case. How the killer might have moved through the house, what path they may have taken, and why no one heard anything. Mid-conversation, a soft thud echoed from the children's bedroom. Everyone froze. The sound technician immediately marked the time and ran the recorder back. The audio picked up the thud clearly, followed by a faint dragging noise, as though something had shifted slightly across the wooden floor. When the team entered the room, they found one small detail that made the air turn cold. A toy bell, which had been sitting against the wall earlier, now rested in the center of the floor. No wind, no vibration, just stillness. The team stood silently as the recorder picked up something else. A soft, almost breath-like exhale, close to the microphone, yet far from any of them. And then, at 2:43 a.m., the house delivered its most chilling moment yet. What happened next pushed the Villisca case into a new level of fear, one investigators hadn't expected. At 2:43 a.m., the entire house seemed to react at once. The temperature in the main hallway dropped sharply, so sudden that the team's breath turned faintly visible in the flashlight beams. The sound technician's equipment picked up a low vibration, almost like the floorboards were responding to something moving beneath them. No one spoke. They simply listened, waiting for another sign. It came from the attic. A single heavy footstep, measured, deliberate, pressed down, causing dust to shift through the thin seams in the ceiling. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't settling wood. It sounded like a person. A moment later, a second footstep followed. The team exchanged tense glances. They knew no one was upstairs. They had locked the attic access themselves. With slow, cautious movements, the investigators gathered their equipment and made their way toward the attic stairwell. Every step seemed louder than the last, the house amplifying their presence. Halfway up, they felt the air grow heavier, as though the upper level carried more weight than the rest of the home. At the top of the stairs, they paused. The attic door, which they had left slightly open, was now closed completely. One investigator reached out, placing a hand on the old wooden surface. It was warm, not hot, not cold. Warm, as if someone had pressed their palm there moments before. They opened the door. The attic was still, silent. No intruder, no signs of movement. But in the far corner, lying on the floorboards, they noticed something out of place. An old iron hook, rusted but shaped like it had once belonged to a tool or a lantern holder. It hadn't been there earlier. The team had swept the entire attic at the beginning of the night. The sound technician knelt beside it, examining it with a flashlight. As he leaned closer, he noticed a small indentation in the dust. An imprint that looked strikingly like the outline of a shoe, but lighter, softer, almost as if someone had been standing there for a long time. Before he could call the others over, a sudden crash erupted downstairs, a forceful, jarring noise that shook the entire house. And when they rushed down to investigate, what they found waiting for them forced the team to confront a possibility they had tried to avoid all night. This is the part of the story where everything comes together, and you're about to see why the Villisca house still keeps investigators awake at night. The crash that shook the house sent the team sprinting down the narrow staircase. Their flashlights cut through the darkness in sharp beams, sweeping across the walls and floors as they searched for the source of the noise. When they reached the ground level, their light settled on the dining room. A wooden chair had toppled over, one that none of them had touched. It wasn't the fall itself that rattled them. It was the way the chair lay perfectly centered in the doorway, as if positioned there on purpose. The lead investigator steadied his breathing and moved toward it, but the sound technician called him back. His recorder was picking up something faint, whispers, soft and indistinct, like overlapping voices barely brushing against the microphone. The team froze. The whispers rose for a moment, then cut off entirely, leaving the room in an unnatural silence. Trying to regain control of the situation, the group gathered around the dining table to review their notes. The historian leading the project pointed to the pattern emerging from their data. Footsteps, object movement, temperature drops, all centered around the same locations: the attic, the stairwell, and the children's room. These were the exact areas investigators in 1912 had mapped out as the suspect's likely path. The unnerving part wasn't the timing. It was the precision. Every event reflected the original timeline, almost down to the minute. As they processed the pattern, the sound of a single floorboard flexing above them made everyone go silent. Slow, steady pressure moved across the ceiling. Not pacing, not frantic movement. The same measured steps described in early witness statements from the 1912 case. Whatever was happening in that house was following the original path. The team gathered their equipment, preparing to leave. But as they stepped outside into the cold Iowa night, the lead investigator turned back. Through the second-floor window, the hallway light flickered on for a brief second, though the house had no electricity connected at that hour. He recorded the time, 2:47 a.m., the same time neighbors in 1912 reported seeing a dim glow in the Moore home. To this day, no definitive explanation exists. Theories range from psychological influence to environmental triggers to something simply unknown. But one fact remains: every team that stays overnight leaves with evidence they can't explain. If this story sent a chill through you, you're not ready for what comes next. Subscribe before the next house calls your name first.